Hikone, a castle town on the shore of Lake Biwa, near the very center of Japan. Step inside the museum at Hikone Castle, and you come face to face with a suit of armor handed down through the Ii family. The famous red armor, the aka-zonae, that has belonged to the Ii for generations. Why was an army clad in this red armor called demons and feared across the battlefield? Part of it, of course, was that the Ii army fought with real strength in the field. But there was something more. The red demon was feared even before the geese ever wore red at all. That may sound like a contradiction. Stay with the story about to unfold, and the mystery will come clear. Turn the clock back roughly 450 years to the age Japan called the Sengoku period, a time of warring lords carving up the land. You are a samurai in the service of the Iwai clan, sworn to follow your lord, Ii Naomasa. You do not yet know much about the life your lord has walked to reach this point. When Ii Naomasa was born, his family served Imagawa Yoshimoto, and the clan stood at the very edge of ruin. The despair of those years is hard to imagine from his gentle, composed portrait. His father was accused of treason and forced to take his own life. Orphaned, raised in a temple, Naomasa nonetheless grew into a commander who would lead a fearsome army. Later, historians would call him one of the 4 guardian kings of the Tokugawa, one of the 4 warriors most trusted by Tokugawa Ieyasu, the man who united Japan and built a peace that would last some 250 years. So why did that same Ieyasu pass down to Naomasa the very red armor that had once filled him with terror? A clear answer has never come to light. In the Sengoku period, armor and helmets were colored mostly in black, and countless suits of that dark armor crossed the battlefields. Against all of it, armor painted red caught every samurai's eye, and it did more than catch the eye. Toppling enemy after enemy with overwhelming force, the army Naomasa led came in time to be called demons. But Naomasa's army was not the first to be called by that name. About 10 years after Oda Nobunaga struck down Imagawa Yoshimoto at Okehazama, and Tokugawa Ieyasu broke free of the Imagawa to stand on his own, one man finally moved to unite Japan. He had the ability to do it. He commanded fierce and disciplined troops, and lords across the country dreaded the same question. When would he strike? Newly independent and full of confidence, Ieyasu marched out to face him and met a humiliating, crushing defeat, so lopsided in raw fighting power that he barely escaped with his life back to his own castle. As he fled the field, Ieyasu saw them, an army in red armor sweeping across the ground, cutting down his men one after another. Back inside his castle walls, that army in red must have burned itself into his memory and refused to leave, and so must the man behind it. The man Ieyasu feared was named Takeda Shingen. From his base in Kai Province, present-day Yamanashi, he had seized the southern half of Shinano Province, today's Nagano, and stood among the finest commanders of the age. Shingen moved his mounted troops wherever he pleased, and cut his enemies down at will. You know that strength in your bones. You felt it in that ruinous defeat. One of Shingen's warriors, Yamagata Masakage, dyed his unit's armor and helmets red and became known as the sharpest, hardest fighting force within the cavalry. This was where the red armor began. In war, armor was almost always made in black, the least visible color, the better to deceive the enemy's eye and slip through the dark for a surprise attack. Masakage did the opposite. By painting his unit red, he announced its presence on the field, and by fighting with raw courage, he lifted the spirits of his own side. On the battlefield, red was a declaration. We will never retreat. It boasted to the enemy that this unit had cut down so many foes their armor had turned the color of blood. To the men facing it, an army dyed red meant one thing: the god of death. With the red armor at its heart, the Takeda cavalry was a threat to everyone who stood against it. Then Shingen died with his life's work unfinished, and his son Katsuyori took his place. and from that moment, the god of death began to fade. The turning point came in 1575 at the Battle of Nagashino. Roughly 2 years after his humiliation, Ieyasu joined Oda Nobunaga and built palisades to blunt the charge of the horses. Nobunaga readied as many as 3,000 matchlock guns and fired them in rolling volleys, 3 ranks deep, and the cavalry, red armor and all, was destroyed. Masakage, who had led the red armor, fell in the fighting at Nagashino. Stripped of the red armor and of his elite cavalry, Katsuyori found it harder and harder to hold his power together. In 1582, an Oda campaign into Kai province drove him to Tenmokuzan. Along the way, the senior retainer he had counted on most betrayed him, and he lost any force that could stand and fight. At the end, resisting with a few dozen followers, he was surrounded by an Oda army more than 100 times his number. Katsuyori took his own life alongside his wife and child, and the Takeda house was gone. When word reached you, you must have found it impossible to believe. The red armor, its master dead, should have vanished forever with the fall of the Takeda. But the story did not end there. That same year, in the settlement of his war with the Hojo, Ieyasu was ceded Kai and Shinano provinces, and he set out to find the men who had once served the Takeda. He wanted their military methods and their fierce cavalry folded into his own ranks. Once he had taken in the former Takeda retainers, he reorganized his forces, built a new unit around those very men, and put in place a structure that kept the Takeda way of war alive. Nearly everyone in the house assumed the captain of this new unit would be chosen from among the senior retainers. The choice stunned them all. The man Ieyasu named was Naomasa, barely 22 years old, and with that, Ieyasu resolved to raise him into the ranks of his senior retainers. Ieyasu's decision sent the senior retainers into an uproar. They had served the Tokugawa faithfully all along and had survived even that shattering defeat at Shingen's hands. Surely, they felt, one of them deserved the post. But Ieyasu saw it differently. The retainers who had followed him since his boyhood had done so only because their fathers and grandfathers had served before them. They were not truly his own men, raised by his hand. At times, they leaned on that inherited service to push back against his wishes. Now independent of the Imagawa and rising as a lord in his prime, Ieyasu needed his retainers to understand that he was no longer the boy they remembered. Naomasa was different. From boyhood he had served as Ieyasu's page, tending to his lord's needs, standing guard, skilled in both arms and learning, and his modest nature had earned him a fine reputation all around. For a man who now had to look out over all of Japan alongside Nobunaga, raising up his own hand-picked man as a senior retainer and using him to bind the rest together was not optional. It was essential. Elevating Naomasa was his first move. Lifting a newcomer of just 22 into the senior ranks drew no shortage of resentment. As his retainer, you too must have spent those days on edge. But Naomasa had already proven himself. When Nobunaga fell at the Honnoji incident, it was Naomasa who guarded Ieyasu as he fled through the mountains of Iga and brought him home to his own territory alive, no small achievement. There was more at stake than pride. Many of the old retainers still nursed bitter feelings over that catastrophic defeat against Shingen, the one they had barely survived. The chance that they might take their revenge on the former Takeda men was not zero. Ieyasu wanted to absorb the Takeda inheritance, their strategy, the way they handled cavalry, and to promote his own man over the old guard and replace them. Putting one of those old retainers in charge of the new unit was simply out of the question. And of course, nothing guaranteed that the former Takeda men would follow Naomasa just because it was him. To them, any of Ieyasu's retainers was still an enemy to be destroyed. To calm them, to make them believe that following the Tokugawa was the way to go on living, took one decisive stroke. It meant inheriting the old prestige of the Takeda and reviving the very thing that had stood as their symbol, and through that, winning their absolute loyalty. That symbol was Masakage's red armor. It had been the beating heart of the Takeda cavalry, its red alone enough to make an enemy taste his own death. That red army was brought back to life under Naomasa's command. Following Ieyasu's order, Naomasa dyed his men's armor and helmets red, and of course his own as well. The red armor had returned. The armor that survives today has weathered more than 4 centuries, and its color may look a little dulled now. Back then it was dyed a burning, living red, and the former Takeda men fell into the strange sense that Masakage himself had come back from the dead. Naomasa spoke to the Takeda veterans now under his command. Be proud that you fought as men of the Takeda. No one can shame you for it. Your lord may have changed, but your strength lives on inside the house of Tokugawa. Now go and prove it on the field. Watching him rally the old Takeda men, listening to those words, you felt your respect for him deepen. In 1584, at the Battle of Komaki Nagakute, Naomasa rode out at the head of the red armor for the first time. From the ornament crowning his helmet to the ferocity with which he swung his long spear and cut men down, he came to be called the Red Demon of Ii, and the other lords learned to fear the name. The imperial court granted Naomasa a court rank, but he seems never to have used the title afterward. By one account, he chose to keep his distance from the court, valuing his place as Ieyasu's retainer above all else. In 1586, when Ieyasu submitted to Toyotomi Hideyoshi and traveled to Kyoto as a sign that he accepted vassalage, Hideyoshi, who had had his eye on Naomasa, granted him his own surname and the right to an audience on his own. Followed by the red armor, and known now as the Red Demon, Naomasa became the highest-ranking, most honored of all the retainers of the Tokugawa. In 1590, when Hideyoshi laid siege to the Hojo stronghold of Odawara Castle with an army of more than 200,000, Naomasa was one of the few commanders to break into that formidable fortress. For it, he was granted a domain of 120,000 koku, the largest held by any Tokugawa retainer. Less than 10 years after inheriting the red armor as Ieyasu's hand-picked man, Naomasa had become a great general, his name known across the realm. In 1598, on the 18th day of the 8th month by the old calendar, a giant star fell. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the man who had succeeded Oda Nobunaga and brought the realm to heel, passed from this world. On the edge of death, Hideyoshi entrusted what came after to the 5 most powerful lords, begging them to devote themselves to his son Hideyori and to the peace of the land. Then he closed his eyes for good. Things did not go as he had wished. A rift widened between 2 camps, those who felt they owed Hideyoshi a debt and backed his son Hideyori, and those who backed the most capable man alive, Ieyasu. What drove the split deeper than anything was the invasion of Korea Hideyoshi had launched in his lifetime. The lords who crossed to the Korean peninsula faced an unfamiliar land, the resistance of the Korean army, and the support Ming China lent to that army. 2 campaigns in 1592 and again in 1597, both ended in failure. The war, thrown at with the full weight of every lord, drained the country's strength to the bone. Even those who felt indebted to Hideyoshi grew furious at the cold, unbending conduct of his hand-picked men on the ground, men like Ishida Mitsunari, and pulled away. The conflict, already alive while Hideyoshi lived, only deepened after his death. The gap kept opening and never closed. In 1600, on the 15th day of the 9th month by the old calendar, both camps led their armies onto the field at Sekigahara in Mino Province, today's Gifu, and the battle that would decide who ruled Japan began. Later ages would call the Tokugawa side the Eastern Army and the Toyotomi side the Western Army. The Eastern vanguard had been fixed on Fukushima Masanori, who had turned from the Toyotomi. But a heavy fog that morning smothered the field, and it was Ieyasu's 4th son, Matsudaira Tadayoshi, together with Naomasa at his side, who blundered into a clash with the western forces of Ukita Hidei, and by that chance encounter, so the account goes, the battle was set alight, Then it ground to a stalemate. This was a fight to split the realm in two, with seasoned lords gathered from every corner of the country. No one expected it to be settled easily. The fighting had begun early in the morning, and by around noon the situation was still too tangled to read. Then one man's decision changed everything. Kobayakawa Hideaki, a Western commander, turned traitor in the early afternoon and began attacking his own side. That broke the balance, and the Eastern victory was sealed. Amid the routed Western army, Naomasa came up against the fiercely fighting forces of Shimazu Yoshihiro and Shimazu Toyohisa. He cut down Toyohisa, but took Shimazu gunfire in the leg. There was a bitter irony in it. Naomasa pursued the Shimazu so fast that his own men could not keep pace, and the very unit meant to guard him was left behind. Chasing the Shimazu down alone, he was gravely wounded. Even badly hurt, Naomasa threw himself into the aftermath, negotiating terms with Mori Teramoto, the Western Supreme Commander, and laying the groundwork for Ieyasu to open the Edo shogunate. But the price of cutting down one of the enemy's leading generals was steep. Long after Sekigahara, the wound would go on quietly shortening his life. With recovery from his grave wound in doubt, Naomasa still arranged the setting for Chosokabe Morichika, who had fought for the Western Army, to make his apology to Ieyasu and carried out the peace talks with the Shimazu. He also worked to spare the lives of Sanada Masayuki and Sanada Yukimura of the western side, the men who had pinned down the army of Ieyasu's son Tokugawa Hidetada at Ueda and made it arrive too late for Sekigahara. Having spent his own life to help the Tokugawa unify the realm, Naomasa at last gave out. On the first day of the second month of Keicho 7, March 24, 1602 by the Western calendar, he died at Sawayama Castle, the reward he had been given for his service at Sekigahara. He was 42. His remains were laid to rest at Choshoin Temple, known today as the Ash Mount, where you can still go to pay your respects. The Edo shogunate would not be founded until the following year, 1603. Naomasa left this world without ever seeing the realm formally become the Tokugawa's own. In a little over 2 years from Sekigahara, the man who had first stood out as Ieyasu's page, who inherited the Takeda red armor and rode across battlefield after battlefield piling up honors, ran through his life at a sprint and was gone. Headship of the Thuri-kwan house passed to his eldest son, Naokatsu, later renamed Naotsugu. But Naokatsu was dull-witted and could not settle the turmoil within the house after his father's death. In 1615, by order of the shogunate, the second son, Naotaka, who was serving as a close attendant to the second shogun, Hidetada, took over as head of the aka-zonae. Years later, when Date Masamune tried to cash in on a written pledge of 1,000,000 koku reward that Ieyasu had given him around the time of Sekigahara, it was Naotaka who mediated the dispute, turning back Masamune's claim and forcing him to back down. Wielding the inherited red armor, he had also distinguished himself at the summer siege of Osaka. For all this, the shogunate valued him anew and named him his brother's successor. Naomasa never lived to see Hikone Castle. It was in Naotaka's day, and because Naotaka stood at the heart of the shogunate, that the castle was able to keep its commanding grandeur. For his part at Sekigahara, Naomasa was granted Sawayama Castle at Hikone, which had belonged to Ishida Mitsunari, and took a domain of 180,000 koku. Why did Ieyasu give Naomasa Ishida Mitsunari's castle, there on the shore of Lake Biwa? At Sekigahara, the supreme commander of the Western Army may have been Mori Teramoto in name, but it is no exaggeration to say Ishida Mitsunari ran the whole of it in practice. And Sawayama Castle sat on a vital crossroads binding east and west, linked to the highway that ran along the southern edge of Lake Biwa and onto Kyoto. Ordinarily, a man simply moved into the castle he was given and used it as it stood. Sawayama was the exception. There was a purpose in Ieyasu handing Naomasa Hikone and Sawayama Castle with it. Giving Naomasa the land, Ishida Mitsunari had ruled was meant to keep the remnants of the Western Army from raising a banner of revolt. The plan was to tear down Sawayama Castle, a symbol of the old order, and have a new castle built in its place. That new castle was Hikone Castle. Its construction took around 20 years. The materials came from local timber and stone, and the whole strength of the Ii house went into raising it. Hikone Castle stands as a symbol of a new age, the end of the Sengoku period, and the coming of Tokugawa rule under the Edo shogunate. Because of Naomasa's work, and because Naotaka became a senior figure of the shogunate, the Ieyasu Kelei would spend the next roughly 250 years at the heart of that government, helping to steer the affairs of state. The Airyu survived as senior retainers of the shogunate, and Hikone Castle kept its grandeur, which is why, today, it is counted among the 12 castles whose original keeps still stand from that era, and why it has been designated a national treasure. A museum was built to display the Furi family's collection too, and that is why today you are able to look upon the red armor, exactly as it was. The red armor before you, Naomasa's portrait, the treasures of generation after generation of the Furi, you have seen now what they mean, and the history they came through. The red armor is not simply armor painted red. It carries forward the will of the Takeda cavalry that once ran wild across the battlefields. By summoning the former Takeda men and entrusting them to Naomasa, Ieyasu did much to bring about the Tokugawa's unification of the realm. That much is plain. Beyond the portrait, the folding screens depict the Seroisi and the common people, and the harshness of the battlefield, a record, too, of the wars fought by Naomasa and the Tsuruis who came after him. The Edo shogunate lasted some 250 years, then ended. The Meiji era began, and roughly 150 more years have passed since, in all, more than 4 centuries. What has been handed down to the present day speaks eloquently of how things once were. Beside Hikone Castle lies Genkyuen, a garden laid out by the 4th Lord, Naoki, several generations after Naotaka. Modeled on the 8 views of Omi, it is a place that calls back the quiet of those times. Thinking of the lives of Naomasa and Naotaka, men who lived through the Sengoku period, you might do well to spend a still, unhurried hour in Genkyuen. In front of J.R. Hikone Station, which you will almost certainly use when you visit the castle, stands a bronze statue of Naomasa in his red armor. From the moment you arrive in Hikone, the sight of that fierce figure will make it hard to hide your excitement at being about to see the real red armor with your own eyes. Go a little farther, and there is Lake Biwa, so vast you might mistake it for the sea. From its shore, with the keep of the Hikone Castle you have just toured rising in the distance, you will turn toward home, letting the legend of the Red Demon settle deep. Naomasa's red armor was not something he created himself. It was inherited from the surviving retainers of the Takeda, a house he had helped to crush and conquer, and he did not take it up by his own choosing. It came to him as an order. On top of that, more than a few men refused to accept that it should pass to a stripling of 22. Naomasa answered them in silence by producing results, pinning down the opposition, earning recognition as a senior retainer of the Tokugawa, until even Hideyoshi and the imperial court began to take notice of it. Could anyone else have carried it this far? To win over the men who had been his enemies, to bring them around, and to send them back to the battlefield once more as a Red Army. Could another man have done it? Had it been anyone but Naomasa, the red armor you were looking at would not have survived into this world. It would have been lost at the moment of conquest, with no one to carry it on. Japan holds stories still unknown even to the Japanese. If you want to see the next of those untold stories, subscribe to the channel and wait for the next video. It, too, will bring to light a hidden story.